How do we think about this in welfare terms? Well, let's start off with our equilibrium point, where the quantity demanded equals the quantity supplied at a wage rate of $15. The firm's surplus, that is the employer surplus, the demander's surplus, is again the area under the demand curve up to the quantity, equilibrium quantity, and above the equilibrium wage rate. The worker's surplus is the area under the equilibrium wage rate up to the equilibrium quantity and above the supply for labour curve. So this is the worker's surplus. If the market is in equilibrium, as it is here, we can see that the economic welfare area in total is the firm's surplus plus the worker's surplus. And there's no deadweight loss of economic welfare, so we can say overall economic welfare is being maximised. There is an efficient allocation of labour resources here. But when we impose the minimum wage, we can see that the firm's surplus area is going to be squished, assuming the minimum wage is upheld, is enforced. So the firm's surplus area will be restricted to the area above the demand for labour curve up to the quantity which is now demanded, which is only 3,000 now, and above the new price, which is the minimum wage. What about the worker's surplus? Well, the worker's surplus might be restricted to $13, because we know for 3,000 workers are willing to work for a minimum of $13 given by the supply curve. And so the worker's surplus area is the price above the minimum they'd be willing to pay, up to the quantity that's of workers employed, above the supply curve. What about this white area in the middle here? Well, we know there's a deadweight loss for a start. So that's just taken as given. We can say, therefore, there is welfare, economic welfare is not being maximised. We are not being allocatively efficient. But what happens to this white area here? Who gets that? Well, if the minimum wage were not enforced strictly, it's entirely possible that workers would be willing to accept a wage of only $13 as given by the supply curve. Firms could bargain the wage down to that minimum wage that workers would be willing to accept. And so the economic welfare area that goes to the firms, that is the firm's surplus, would increase to gobble up some of the worker surplus. So the firm surplus would be the area under the demand curve up to the quantity supply, up to the quantity employed, and above the, let's call it black market, illegal wage that workers were willing to accept. And the worker surplus area is clearly much smaller. So in this case, if the law is secretly violated and in fact workers are being paid below the minimum wage while it's being enforced, then we could say that workers unambiguously lose and employers potentially win. To find out whether they actually win or not, we'd need to compare that outcome for the employers with the equilibrium. Now we note that from the deadweight loss that the firm's surplus area that was lost was this triangle here. But they gained in exchange, that is $2. And they gained in exchange this area here, which when we calculate it turns out to be $6. So we can clearly see that when the minimum wage is imposed but is not enforced strictly and a black market emerges, that employers can potentially gain out of this arrangement. On the other hand, if the minimum wage is strictly enforced by the government so that a black market does not emerge, then the firm's economic surplus area remains this small triangle here, and the workers' surplus will be the area under the price, which will be the enforced minimum wage, up to the quantity of workers employed, which is 3, and above the supply curve. So this entire area here will now be the workers' surplus. So when the law is strictly enforced, employers unambiguously lose some economic welfare, and potentially workers could win from that. In order to find out whether they do or not, we need to compare to the equilibrium. We know that because of the imposition of the minimum wages enforced, the economic welfare area lost by workers is this triangle here, but they gain by transferring some of the firm surplus to the workers, this area here. And if we compare the two, we can see that the amount gained by the workers is greater than the amount by transferring wealth, by transferring surplus, is greater than the amount lost, which is deadweight loss. In which case, in this example at least, workers would overall gain, despite the fact that in total for the whole market there's less economic welfare being generated. So despite the fact that we have what we would classify as an inefficient allocation of resources, nonetheless workers, as a group anyway, would be in favour of this kind of minimum wage, despite firms being opposed to it.